Ruin My Childhood.
Thank you for listening to Ruin My Childhood, the podcast where we decide if some things are better left in the past. I'm Mike.
And I'm Kat.
And Kat, what are we going to be talking about today?
A Knight's Tale.
A Knight's Tale.
You've been harassing me to watch this one.
For at least a year.
Yeah.
But it kind of made sense for us to do it at this point. Renaissance Faire would have ended a few weeks ago. You work every weekend at the Renaissance Faire here in Southern California. You did it for years in Northern California.
I think this movie's supposed to be medieval times.
It's supposed to be in the Renaissance.
The Renaissance.
Chaucer's in it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Chaucer. Geoffrey Chaucer is, or Joffrey. Is it Joffrey or Geoffrey Chaucer?
I think it's Geoffrey.
Yeah. But Chaucer is Paul Bettany's character. So it would be Renaissance.
Oh.
But yeah, we decided to watch this because obviously jousting is a big part of the Renaissance Faire. And,
Is that what we decided?
Well, it was just, something to remind us of the Renaissance Faire since we weren't able to go this year because coronavirus.
What
do you remember about this movie?
Not much, honestly. I remember the music.
Right.
The music was unique. And that was kind of like the big buzz it was getting when it first came out. It had Heath Ledger in all his glory. This is when he was like very young and he was like a little cherub.
Yeah, he hadn't done a ton of stuff that were, big U.S. movies yet.
No.
I think he had done 10 Things I Hate About You and The Patriot by this point, and that was really it.
Yeah. And honestly, not much Alan Tudyk.
Alan Tudyk is in it, yep.
Yeah, that's about it.
So I remember a little bit more. This was a movie that my family liked. Every time it came on TV, we watched it. We own the Blu-ray, but we've never actually watched it. I'm pretty sure I picked this up on like a Black Friday sale, and we just haven't watched it in years, knowing we're going to eventually cover it on the podcast.
Right.
But I definitely remember the music, obviously modern music. There was Queen, AC/DC, a lot of big bands. I think David Bowie as well. So yeah, modern music in a Renaissance movie. I definitely remember the jousting. I remember a scene where they make fun of him because he's got really light armor that a female blacksmith makes him.
Wow, you remember a lot about this.
My dad watched it every time it came on TV. It's still probably been at least 12 years since I've watched it because it's been that long since I've lived with my family. Or I guess it's only been about 10 years, but still.
Yeah, it's been about 10 years since I've seen this.
Yeah, so it's, about 10 years. I watched it a lot, and I'm actually really excited about watching this one. I feel like it's going to be pretty good.
This one came out in that era around Ever After, when they started kind of putting a modern twist on older material, I guess.
Yeah, but still kept it in the time period that it was in.
Yeah, it was fun. They played around with a lot of things. A lot of leeway was given for historical inaccuracies for the sake of artistic expression.
Exactly. And, that's actually coming back. There's that show on Hulu that I really want to watch. I think it's called The Great, and it's about Catherine the Great.
Oh, yeah, I want to see that.
And it doesn't look like it's historically accurate at all.
No.
Well, it looks very funny.
Reign is probably the least historically accurate thing I've ever seen. But,
that CW show?
It's not quite as sexy to have her married to like a 12-year-old cripple.
Right.
So I get it.
But yeah, I'm excited to talk about this movie after we watch it. But we do have a couple of comments from our listeners. Do you want to read one?
Sure. Kenton Zero Adamar says, "You have been weighed, you have been measured, and you have been found wanting."
I think that's from the bad guy. Is it Rufus? I never remember his last name. I know it's Rufus.
That's the end of the movie.
Yeah,
because several people say it.
Right, but Adamar, I think, is Rufus's character.
Yeah,
he plays the bad guy and everything.
He does. He's such a good baddie.
I've met him. He's very, very nice. I sold him a camera and a computer when I still worked retail.
He's British and he lives here.
I mean, he may have just been here filming something, but he's very nice. He had his kids with him, and he was a very nice man.
Oh.
We have Lacey Waldron says, the group danced to Golden Years. To this day, I can't hear that song without thinking of this movie. Yep, David Bowie.
Definitely.
I remember that scene when he just makes up a dance on the spot because he's an imposter.
Well, you always have to have a good dance scene. It's a teen movie.
Yeah, it really is when you think about it.
How many movies back then for teens didn't have a big dance sequence?
No, they all at least have some sort of musical number. Like we did I Can't Hardly Wait not too long ago, and you had him singing Guns N' Roses. Yeah, you have to have some sort of musical number.
We were having a Bollywood moment.
Yeah, we kind of were. You want to read that last one?
Wesley Freeman says, love that movie.
Whoa. Well, Sounds like it's pretty good. Let's go watch it, come back and talk about it.
All right.
Someday, I'll be a knight.
Yes, William. If he believes enough, a man can do anything.
We could do this. In 1 month, we could be on our way to glory and riches none of us ever dreamed of.
You can't even joust.
I think he's getting worse. He is getting worse.
I have the pride, the privilege, nay, the pleasure of introducing to you
Ulrich von Liechtenstein from Gelderland.
Sir Ulrich von Liechtenstein. I would have him win my heart.
You're my favorite knight.
He's won 4 tournaments in a row.
On a horse, that man is unbeatable.
You're just a silly boy with a horse and a stick.
It's called a lance. Hello?
All right, we watched A Knight's Tale, and there's a lot to unpack in this movie. Like,
Quite a lot different.
I don't know how to say how I feel about this film because there were certainly things that I liked about it, but it wasn't a good movie.
Yeah, I don't know if I would call it good. And here's the important distinction there, and I say this a lot. It doesn't have to be a good movie to be genuinely enjoyable.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't have to be a good movie for me to love it.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be so bad that it's good to be enjoyable. Like, you can have a movie that's just a movie.
Yeah.
And I feel like this cradles that line of being just a movie.
It cradles a line? Why would you cradle a line when you can straddle it? Seems easier.
It straddles that line of being just a movie to almost being a bad movie. Like, it rides that line.
It's pretty ridiculous at points, but it's endearing.
It really is.
It's very idealistic.
It is. And what's interesting is how it is so historically accurate in the fact that it isn't. Like, every knight that's named was a real knight, but all these knights lived hundreds of years apart from each other.
Right.
It had Geoffrey Chaucer, played by Paul Bettany. It had Prince Edward, who was a real prince and everything. Right. But they called him the Black Prince or something like that. But that wasn't his name until like 100 years after he died.
Yeah.
So, they pepper in all these little things, but it's not accurate at all.
No.
Like, even Sir Ulrich von Liechtenstein, which is
von Liechtenstein,
the fake name that Heath Ledger's character Will takes on, was a real knight who anytime he got struck would give somebody a gold ring, and he ended up giving like hundreds of rings out over his lifetime.
Dang.
Yeah.
Swag for his groupies.
Yeah. Well, he would give them to his opponents that hit him.
What?
Yeah. So if he got struck by a lance on a joust and they broke a lance on him, he would give them a golden ring.
Huh.
And he gave out hundreds of them over his career.
Why?
I don't know. Do you want to summarize this movie real quick?
No,
okay,
not
I'll
at
summarize
all.
it real quick.
When have I ever wanted to summarize a movie?
You know what? Maybe one day you'll surprise our listeners.
It's not in my skill set. I don't even know that I can do it.
All right, I got you, fam.
Which is pretty bad for an actor.
And a podcast host.
Tell me about the film that you wrote. I don't know.
So basically, this movie is about a squire named Will, played by Heath Ledger. A little fact about Heath Ledger: his name is actually Heather Ledger. That's the joke I've been teasing.
That's the joke? What?
You want to tell our listeners what's going on?
Oh my God. For months, Mike has been on my case about doing this episode of the podcast so that we could watch A Knight's Tale, and he had this great joke saved up. And maybe like once every week and a half for 6 months, he's been like, oh, I have such a good joke for Knight's Tale. Such a good joke. I can't wait.
It's been like a month and a half, but
It's
okay.
been longer than that.
It's been about a month and a half,
It's been at
but okay.
least since quarantine started. We're just in a weird place where time feels a little less linear, I guess. Yeah.
So yeah, I've been teeing up this joke for
that.
From a month and a half to 3 months, we'll say.
For that.
And she thought it was going to be this terrible joke about him being, not alive. But no, it's the stupid name about his joke about his name, and that's not even real.
It's the kind of joke that just gets like a peanut M&M thrown at you. Stupid.
As she looks around for things to throw at me.
I've got this.
No, you just sprayed me with the cat spray bottle.
You kind of got your headphones little. Might want to wipe that.
So anyway, this movie is about
worth it.
a squire named Will, played by Heath Ledger. He is supposed to be taking care of this knight during this tournament, but the knight dies, so he decides to impersonate his knight, win the tournament, and then decides to just keep this going and creates this knight persona and just breaks the law by essentially impersonating a cop for the whole movie. And that's pretty much it. He's just trying to change his stars and become an actual knight by the end of the movie.
Oh, so
this movie just kind of really just kicks off with Queen.
It just kind of really just kind of?
Yep. That's exactly what it does. Well, kind of, yeah. Because you get We Will Rock You by Queen, one of the greatest rock songs, one of the biggest songs that play at actual rock, not rock, but like sporting events to get people pumped. And that was the big reason why the director, Brian Helgeland, used modern music, is he said that, if you look back at Renaissance movies and medieval movies and using that kind of music, it doesn't get us contemporary viewers pumped. Like, the music doesn't do anything for us. So he basically was trying to say Queen, the way we feel about We Will Rock You is how they would have felt about the Renaissance music of the time that they would have been playing at the joust tournament. Mm-hmm. So he's basically tried to say he substituted modern music for equivalent music of that time. But the issue that I had with it is not that I didn't enjoy having, David Bowie, Queen, AC/DC, was you start the movie with Queen, but just have it with like a bunch of, I almost said protesters. I don't know why I almost said peasants, a bunch of peasants just like half-ass singing the song because they're Czech extras, so they don't really know English that well. But you just see a bunch of people singing Queen for 3 or 4 minutes while the credits roll. Where I would have rather seen them going boom, boom, ch, boom, boom, ch, as like the joust was going or something to show. But yeah, it was a little weird just having Queen as the opening credits.
Yeah, I think it was just meant to pump people up.
Yeah,
really get them going.
And what really starts the story is Heath Ledger shows up. We first see him all gross. He has like a really gnarly beard, really long, matted, dreaded hair. And he's got these cloth nose plugs in his nose. And he's trying to get his, I don't know what you call, they're not master. If you're a squire, what is your knight? Do you call them, they're not your master, but they're kind of your mentor.
They are.
Yeah, so he's trying to get, I guess, his master, his knight, to wake up and go joust. And the guy's not responding, so he takes out his nose plugs and he hands them to Roland, who's played by Mark Addy, who played Robert Baratheon in Game of Thrones. That's where most people know him from. He puts the nose plugs in his nose and then goes and prods the guy. He's like, oh yeah, he's dead.
It's disgusting.
Yeah, and then like that's kind of where the movie kicks off. They do a one-off thing where they impersonate the knight, and then they kind of get this idea that they could do this permanently and just pretend to be a knight and his squires and just win money going around the country doing jousts and doing games and whatnot, pulling shenanigans.
Right off the bat, this movie makes it clear that it's not going to be quite like the other vaguely historical movies of the era. There were quite a few at that time. We had Ever After, which was a big one that came out around the same kind of era.
Yeah, a couple years, like maybe 2 or 3 years before this. Yeah,
and
pretty close.
I think this made it clear from the beginning that they wanted it to be a little bit grittier, wanted to show a little bit more of like the dirty side of life. Because let's face it, people probably smell disgusting and were filthy most of the time.
Right.
They would just smell nice smelling things to drown it out.
Yeah, rose petals, whatnot.
And we actually see like 2 dead bodies in one of the first dark scenes. So they're arguing back and forth about this ridiculous plan for him to become a knight or pretend to be a knight and train for these tournaments. And they don't have much time. The 2 servants are just explaining how ridiculous it is, that it's never going to work. And then at the end of this argument, the camera does a 180 and we see a cage with a dead man in it and another man hanging next to him.
Yeah, it's super dark. It kind of reminded me of a Coen film. Coen Brothers film.
Right, yeah. Just to reinforce the line of, we know our place in life, and just like those servants there forgot, we're tempting fate.
Yeah. Well, and then it kind of, they make a more, I mean, it's no more rational than that, but they make a rational argument of, we have no money. Like, we just won this. We're lucky we didn't get caught doing this. We literally ran away after we won. We have enough money to have food and get us home. Like, we should just do that. and he convinces them to let him train. We get another staple of these type of movies, the montage.
Well, okay, so why exactly does he feel so adamantly about training? Because if he was a squire, then that would mean that he had been serving this knight since he was 14 years old.
Right.
So a squire, like, generally does work his way up to eventually become a knight.
Well, what I'm confused about is I don't know if we actually saw the dead knight's body or his face, because later on in the movie, in a flashback, this movie does flashbacks interestingly. Normally it's like somebody gets hit in the head or something and then they go into a flashback. But we see a knight that seems to be well-to-do, has a pretty large crew, but I don't think that knight is the same knight that died at the beginning. So maybe he didn't progress far enough in his training. Like, he still is just a squire. Like, you look at his clothing and he's pretty worn and tattered and dirty.
Yeah.
So they don't really explain, but yeah, he's so pressed to do that because his father gave him up when he was like 10 years old to go be a squire and maybe someday be a knight with the goal of changing his stars. And so that's what he did. He gave up his father to go be a knight, and his knight died, and he's no further along.
His dad couldn't feed him anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there's that too, but, you know, he spent his whole life working towards this, and now the knight died before he's at that level where he can go and do anything. Like,
yeah.
He has no prospects. He has no skills other than being a squire. What's he going to do? He'd have to go find another knight. He's a little too old for...
Find another knight.
Yeah, he's a little too old for someone to take him on as a new squire. Like, what is he going to do?
They need an app that matches
Squire.
squires with knights.
Right.
Dead squire, we've got you covered.
Right? It's like Batman needing a new Robin.
What would you call that?
I think Joust. I don't know. I can't think of anything. Lancelot out?
New lances.
New lances. That's not bad. I don't know. I really don't know. But so they have this training montage, which I thought was fun because the training montage never shows him actually get really good.
No.
It just shows him by the end of the montage, he's able to get a lance through a ring while being dragged on a boat. But
it's just fun. It's a good time.
Exactly. He ends up falling off the boat and drowning because he's in armor and he can't get out. I thought that was pretty fun, but you know, you don't get the impression that he's going to be very good.
Well, you didn't have much time. And it's not like they had a lot of money to live off of.
Right.
How long was it?
So they say about a month. And so you imagine anywhere that you're walking is probably going to be at least a week's worth of walking. So you can imagine he probably trained for 2 to 3 weeks max. And then they're walking. And this is what I thought was great. And I think that the supporting cast was really important to this movie, but we were introduced to 2 very important characters over the next 15 minutes or so.
We meet Chaucer in the buff.
Yep. Yeah. So they're walking to the next tournament. They see Paul Bettany's ass. He's naked. And they ask him who he is, and he mentions that he's a writer, and they don't even know what that means. Literacy.
Yeah, but they know what a writer is. They don't know his work.
No, they're like, what does that mean? Like, Watt, played by Alan Tudyk, was just like super confused by the notion that somebody could make a living writing. He's like, what does that even mean? Right.
And someone in their station as servants, of course, would not be literate. But at the time, and of course this depends on when in the Renaissance and where in the Renaissance and religious leanings, but at the time, one would think that Will, if he was a squire, would probably be in the roughly 40% of people in England at that time who could read. And they would be able to read in Latin, they would be able to read in English, and also some of them, depending on the era, in a Norse language or French. But yeah, they needed to be able to understand, and the servants wouldn't have.
Right. So yeah, they did. Alan Tudyk and Roland definitely wouldn't have. But yeah, I could see maybe Will knowing something, because as a knight, you would have to be able to read letters from your lord if you need to go into battle or whatever. So yeah, that is kind of surprising.
I don't know. I can't speak to the education level of a lowly squire.
Right. But yeah, so what I think, going into like literacy, what I thought was really interesting was if they didn't meet Chaucer, they would have been found out immediately, their first time entering a tournament.
So is it that Chaucer's just bored?
So this is supposed to be during a period where there's about a 6 month to a year period where historians cannot account for where Chaucer was.
That's hilarious.
So they're saying this movie takes place in that 6 months to a year where nobody could track him down. So this was before he wrote the Canterbury Tales.
Interesting.
So yeah, he just decides to help him out. And it's not just because he decides to help him out because he's bored. It's because he has a gambling problem. And that's why we see him naked, is they literally took the clothes off his back.
Did Chaucer have a gambling problem?
I don't know if the real life Chaucer did, but this Chaucer did.
This Chaucer's more interesting.
Yeah. So he's a hype man. He's a document forger. He does a little bit of everything. But yeah, the reason he sticks around is he has gambling debts that Will agrees to assume the debt if he helps him get through the tournaments and forge any paperwork he needs, and also to be his herald.
Everyone needs a hype man.
Right. So but he didn't even realize he needed that. Like, he didn't realize that these larger tournaments, you had to have a herald who would call you out. You had to have, they called them patents, which are basically I guess like the equivalent of a driver's license that says, hey, I'm a knight.
Patented knight.
Yeah. So, if it wasn't for them just by chance running across Chaucer, they would have been probably hung the next day.
Yeah, that's pretty ridiculous. Pretty much all of the tiny like single or two line characters, like all the blacksmiths, when his armor gets busted in that first tournament and he needs to get it repaired, he starts looking around the village for a blacksmith that will take it, and all of these Czech guys are like, no, I'm not gonna fix it, in their super thick accents. And then he eventually finds Kate, and she has an Irish accent out of nowhere. No explanation for why she's the only one with that accent, but whatever. It works.
Well, what's funny about that, and that whole interaction was great because he does trick her into, one, repairing his armor.
Right.
By saying, they weren't going to do it, but I thought I'd give you a chance. But they said, don't even bother. And she's like, what? Did they say because I'm a woman? It's like, no, they said you were great with horseshoes, but shite with armor. The fact you're a woman never came up. So he tricks her into fixing the armor, but then she kind of tricks him into taking her along for the rest of the journey because she needs to get back to London but can't afford it.
I thought she was going to Paris.
Oh, no, you're right. So she wanted to go to Paris and couldn't afford it. So she tells him, like, hey, if you just repair your armor, people are going to figure out this isn't your armor. Mm-hmm. You need new armor. Let me do it. I'll take care of you. So if it wasn't for her, he also would have got caught.
Yeah.
But it was funny, to your point with the Czech extras, a lot of the extras didn't speak English. And, obviously one of the big draws to Paul Bettany's characters, he's the herald, and he's the hype man. He's screaming and shouting, boasting about Sir Ulrich von Liechtenstein. And he has these really high energy speeches to get people pumped about him. And there's one at the smaller tournament where nobody cheers after he's done. And so Roland goes, yeah, like puts his hand to his mouth and kind of cheers, and then everyone starts cheering. That was ad-libbed because the extras did not speak English, and so they didn't realize that their cue came up for them to start cheering. Oh, so Mark Addy just ad-libbed that, and so had the Roland character do that, and then everybody started cheering. So it just happened to be perfect timing that there was a camera on him, and they got that going, and they kept it in the movie.
I gotta hand it to them. Like, it doesn't sound like an easy undertaking to film something in a foreign country with that many people who probably don't speak the language of most of the crew, one would assume, because usually they'll bring their crew from wherever. Out of town.
Well, no, I know.
And like, is there much film industry in the Czech Republic?
This was a Sony Columbia picture, and I know a lot of the times, like I know Sony has like I almost said like a stronghold or a foothold in London, so I'm sure they just pulled like the London crew from Sony Studios. London.
I mean, this must have been so fun to work on, but one thing I can't wrap my head around is how the hell they filmed the jousts. Some of the camera work in there, like, I just don't see any way that a camera person does not get smacked with a lance.
I feel like they had to have cameras just mounted on the horses, or I'm sure they had, crane shots or something. I don't know. But I can tell you the way they did it safely was they used, obviously they had stunt people, but they had each lance was like previously scored, so it would actually break, and then they filled it with balsa wood, and they put holes in it and put uncooked linguine in it.
What?
To fill the holes so you couldn't see it, but then it would fly out and it would look like wood splinters.
Yeah, it looked amazing.
The tips were hollow, made with balsa wood and filled with pasta, so when they hit things, it would look like wood splattered everywhere.
There's this one shot where it's in the middle of the joust, and the camera had to be set up on a track right down the middle. what do you even call is it arena? Is it an
Yeah,
arena?
I guess.
It's not a pitch. I don't know. It's on that middle thing, and it completely it rides alongside the horse, and then you see the impact right in front of the camera. You see all the splinters. It had to be either a track or a jib, and just the technical mastery it takes to pull off a shot like that is pretty absurd.
Yeah, absolutely. I was impressed with like the stunt work. There were a lot of times where you'd see like a guy get hit by the lance, flip backwards, slide across that middle rail, and then fall in the mud. I'm like, how did they do this? And they're wearing full suits of armor, so clearly I'm sure they have padding underneath, but still, that had to hurt.
It's insane. There's so many moving parts. Like, just from a liability standpoint,
Right.
There are horses, there are the horse handlers. I think a lot of times for the shots when a horse is pulling off a stunt like this, you do have to have their trainer riding them. So how do you integrate that with the stuntmen who are then getting smacked with the lance? Yeah, it's just a lot. There's a lot to set up and think about.
Absolutely. So I do want to go back to Kate real quick, who was played by Laura Fraser, who I really liked her. She was probably my favorite character because she was just as smart, if not smarter than all the men in the movie.
Right.
She was more capable. She actually had a skill set.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what was Alan Tudyk's character's skill set other
No
than
idea.
being a friend? What was Roland's skill set other than being a friend?
Sherpa.
Yeah, that was it. So she had the metalworking. She also had the woman's perspective when guiding him in the how to woo and court Jocelyn.
And we should talk about Jocelyn.
We should. But yeah, I was really just impressed with Kate. I thought she was fun the whole movie. There's points where they call her and like, I thought you were supposed to be a blacksmith. She's like, yeah, I'm still a woman.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. That I really liked her and that she had agency, that she really stuck it to everybody and just kind of did what she wanted.
And that she didn't have to be paired off with a man.
No, she didn't. She was just one of the guys.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that they just made her part of the gang, and they only really acknowledged that she was a woman twice in the film.
Yeah, so they were really close to having two strong female characters in this. And I guess Jocelyn is, I mean, she's a strong character, but I feel like the rest of her story must have been edited out because we don't know that much about her.
She has these moments where, like when she's standing up to the clergyman kind of thing, that, you know, oh, she seems like she has some agency. There's also points where she kind of calls Will on his misogyny, where he's just like, would you care about my name if I wasn't pretty? And he's like, no, not, of course not. I mean, yes, I would.
And I do like that she's living her life basically just to rage against the machine. Like, you know that she doesn't like her station. You know that she doesn't take the rules seriously because she talks in church and she makes fun of the clergyman. And she even at one point tells him, don't you shush me and not him.
Right. And so those things are great.
But then we don't understand her motivation for any of those things. We don't know where she grew up, where she came from, what her interests are beyond living her life with her handmaid, walking around the village, and then being wooed by William.
Well, that was my issue with her. Like, there are some really great things when she stands up to the clergy. Like, he raises his hand and like shows her his ring and expects her to kiss it, and she's like, "Oh, that's beautiful," or something like that. And so I agree that I would have liked some backstory. Like, who was she? Because she's not a princess. She just seems like she's some noble woman. So it's like, where, like, back then the church wouldn't have allowed that.
Yeah.
And everything. So it's like, who was she that she was allowed to be like this? And we never really see that.
Some courtly woman.
Right. And then once she decides that she's into Will, she kind of becomes like a giggly schoolgirl. Like, there's one point where he never actually promises to win a tournament for her. Then he writes the letter to her, and then he's losing. She's like, it means he loves me. And like, at that point, I feel like she's only there to serve as a vehicle for motivating Will, as opposed to being her own character.
Right. She's inundated with attention from every other knight, and he doesn't offer the same thing, which is the only reason she's intrigued by him.
Right.
And then she plays games.
Right. But then once he plays her games and she's happy with him, like, she's just his accessory for like the latter half of the movie.
Yeah, it's silly. So, I mean, obviously in these films, they always jump to being in love with one another, even though they've just met.
Right.
I like that she's like, okay, well, prove your love for me, lose the tournament. But then halfway through, she changes her mind and then wants
Yeah.
him to win the tournament because I guess she realized she completely screwed him over in that request, and he is obviously losing. So he gets the crap kicked out of him.
Yep.
And then at the end, she meets him in his tent and is like, hey, like, ready for some action. Like, he's in so much pain, and now you want to get laid? Like, that's rude.
Yeah, he grimaces when she like straddles him.
Yeah.
And it's hard to say that her character didn't do a lot for the movie but she really was like a vehicle for furthering the rivalry between Will and Adamar.
I just wish we knew more about her.
I agree, because then it would have made these other things not feel as cringy.
Because I didn't like her. That's
I agree.
the problem.
Yeah. I agree. So it's like we don't know her motivation, and then she quickly becomes a vehicle to further the rivalry. And
I think I just
she
needed
loses
more
her
time
agency.
to warm up to her.
I agree.
As a human.
I think getting a little bit more of their relationship would have been good, because of her relationship, we really get some of the best parts in the movie. Like, one of my favorite jokes in the movie is when she and Will get in a fight just before they go a month without seeing each other. We get this really great scene where they, like, by committee, Will and his crew write a letter to her, and they all use their experiences in love to write a beautiful letter to Jocelyn.
Mm-hmm.
And then during that fight, when she's just like, you're just a silly boy with a stick, you get Watt, played by Alan Tudyk, going like, it's called a lance, duh. And it's like, it's really funny. So it's like, because of her character, you get these great moments, including the dance scene.
Well, and you also get all of the interesting dynamic with Adamar, who
Exactly.
it just elevates his disdain for William,
and
because he wants her, and it's mainly just because he can't have her because she's not interested. So he decides to bypass the entire thing, try and basically buy her
From the dad, yeah.
from her father. Now, whether or not that's actually happening, we don't know. He could have
Right.
just been saying that to
Right.
Will to get under his skin
Just goad him a little bit.
before a tournament. But it just makes Adamar's character so much more interesting because he's so incredibly smug and cool and overly confident at the beginning, and then he gradually comes a little bit unhinged throughout the course of the film, to the point
he's
where
obsessed.
when we get to the dance scene after the tournament, he's like so flustered. It's hard to tell if he's flustered because he can't have William or because he can't have Jocelyn.
Right. Well, what was weird about that whole interaction was, I would have preferred in this movie if at the beginning we had some inkling that maybe Adamar knew that Will wasn't who he said he was, but didn't really have any proof, because he goads Will into making up this dance. He's like, hey, Will, or not Will, hey.
I think that is communicated in glances. Tiny little moments. And that is something I like about this film, is it doesn't underestimate the audience's intelligence.
Yeah, there isn't a really hard plot in this, but no, I do agree. But there's a point where he's at the dance, or they're at the banquet, and he's like, hey, Sir Ulrich, like, why don't you show us a dance from your village? 'Cause I've never heard of your village before. And, you know, we get that iconic scene of him dancing to David Bowie, and it's a really fun scene. But as you're watching that, some of the glances you notice, like he does seem weird, and he's making these really angry incel kind of faces, and you don't know if it is kind of weird. Like, is he mad?
The way they filmed it, like, you see all these shots of Heath Ledger dancing and looking great, and then you see Adamar again, and you're like, wait, who is he into?
Yeah, why would you not show the pictures or the videos of Jocelyn dancing and him being jealous? Because yeah, it is a little weird. And then he like storms off, like huffs off. But then he gets called to well, I guess before he does that, but essentially, like, we only have Will and Adamar interact maybe twice before he goes away for a large portion of the movie. So Will goes to say hi to Jocelyn while Adamar's there, and Adamar makes fun of his armor, kind of thing. And then he loses to Adamar after, but it was kind of like a bittersweet loss, because it was the first time Adamar missed a lance, but he still ultimately beat Will. And we get that line that one of our listeners said, like, you've been weighed, you've been measured, you've come up lacking, or whatever.
You've been found wanting.
You've been found wanting. And that's really all we get, because he's sent off to war. Mm-hmm. And so for a month or something, it's something like a couple of months that Will is just going and just dominating at all these tournaments. And then you see this weird obsessive behavior out of Adamar, where he's essentially getting like the sports page delivered by his squire, and it's just like Ulrich wins, and he's just like, he's in war, and he's more concerned about Sir Ulrich winning than the war.
Yeah, he's just a petty little man, which is part of
and then he cheats.
Everybody, I guess.
Yeah. And then he has no arm. Like, he can't actually beat. I did appreciate this at one point when they get to the next tournament and Adamar's back. He's watching, and Will has gotten significantly better.
Yeah.
And his own like coach, I guess, is like, yeah, there's no way you beat him. Like, you don't beat him. Like, you're not going to. So he ends up at the end of the movie like using an actual sharpened lance,
right,
to stab him.
disguised with a little sugar fist, I guess.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. They made more than one.
Yeah, because she's the woman who made it for him is kind of like demoing it for him, and he crushes it in his fist.
I would have laughed. She's like, that was the only one we had.
Thanks, jerk.
So yeah, at the end of the movie, he gets followed. Will gets followed by Adamar as he goes to like the ghetto and goes and visits his father. And his father is like, "Oh, you're pretty cool now. Great."
That's around the time we get this flashback scene that kind of looks like they ran out of budget.
Yep.
Like they rented the tank and a fog machine. And they're like, "All right, that's all we need."
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, because they like go across the river and like they just have the flashback of him going across the river when his dad gives him to the night.
To be fair, I guess it is London, so one could just like make a room incredibly foggy and be like, "Look, it's London."
Yep,
it works.
But yeah, he figures out that Will definitely isn't a knight and turns him to the police.
The police,
the guards. I don't know. Like I don't know who you turn somebody like that into, but he turns him into the authorities.
The prince is on his side already,
right? So but he spends like a night in jail, and then the prince comes and's like, "Hey," and we didn't talk about him earlier, but there's a point early on in the movie where he goes up against a knight who's injured, and the guy's like, "I've never not finished a joust. Like, is there any way we can just draw this one? You're already winning, so you'll still win." Mm-hmm. And so William's like, "Sure, why? Like, yeah, I already won, and why am I going to knock you off your horse? Like, there's no reason to."
Right.
Well, then later on, the same knight comes back, but it turns out we figure out he's the prince, and everybody decides to forfeit, and Will's like, "Nope," and decides to go and joust him even though he's the prince. And the prince was like, "That was pretty cool. Like, I'm really glad you did that."
Most people won't play with me.
Yeah. So at the end of the movie, the prince was just like, "Yeah, you did me a solid that one time. Yeah, you broke the law for months, but I'll tell everyone you're a knight. Don't even worry, bud."
Right.
And so he's just a knight now, and he like gets to maintain his same place. Like, did they not continue the joust for the 24 hours that he was in jail?
I don't know. I'm sure he had some fabricated documents made up.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, but back then, I mean, like everyone's documents were fabricated.
Right.
Like, sure, you're his son.
Right.
Sure.
So yeah, he ends up winning. And this is like a weird thing. So we have two flashbacks, which normally are from like a blow to the head or getting splashed in the face with water. And you see Will get two flashes. Like when he was on the boat going across the river, like water splashes on him, and then he like flashes back to when he was yeah. And then the other one was when he got knocked off his horse for the first time. Mm-hmm. You see him go back to going to the night the first time. But,
going to the night.
But this one, there's a weird one when Adamar is finally defeated. Like Will takes off all his armor. He goes in just his tunic, which is stupid as hell. He lashes the lance to his arm because he got stabbed by the sharpened lance. But he ends up defeating Adamar. And it has this weird scene that's like nothing else in the movie where he gets knocked off the horse and Adamar's floating. And then one by one, all of our crew, so you get Chaucer, you get Kate, you get Watt, you get Roland.
It's because he had already said, next time you see me, you will be looking up at me from your back.
Right. So he's floating, but you have the crew, like his crew is like, "You've been found wanting," or whatever it was that Adamar said to him.
Because it was like an out-of-body experience.
Exactly. And then it like cuts back into like it like fast forwards back into it, and you see him like fly off the horse and everything. It was just weird because it was...
I liked it.
It was was this a hallucination that Adamar had, or was like, it was weird. Like there's nothing else like it in the movie.
No, there isn't.
And then the movie just kind of ends with Will kissing Jocelyn, and then the camera circles around, and then it just goes to like black, and you just see them kissing in front of like a black background.
And then they wrap it up with "We Are the Champions," but
not the Queen version.
The Robbie Williams version. Yeah. I mean, it was Robbie Williams and Queen,
but
of all choices.
Yeah, weird. Especially when you had an actual Queen with Freddie Mercury song at the beginning of the movie.
Maybe they could only afford to do one.
If they could afford to do one, they could afford to do the other.
Maybe Queen is like, you know what? People hate this one. Can you give it a few listens?
If I make a movie now and I want Queen in it, do I have to get Adam Lambert's version?
Probably.
Son of a...
Oh, Adam Lambert.
Actually, he's not terrible with the Queen stuff, but still, it's not Freddie Mercury.
So weird.
But yeah, that's the movie.
It's not good.
It's not a good movie. It really isn't.
I enjoyed it.
There's certain like I don't think I would go and watch this again just for the sake of watching it.
There are moments that are really fun to make fun of because they're so just like dumb early 2000s teen movie.
Right. And everybody's charismatic and fun.
And then there are moments where you're like, that's absurd, but you excuse it because it drives the plot forward.
Like, the movie's not long.
It's
only
long.
It's just over 2 hours. It's like 2 hours and 13 minutes or something like that.
I thought it was a better film than it actually is.
Even though there's nothing that really lags, I don't think the pacing was necessarily great. Like there was moments where it was like, this is really fun, but there would be like 10 minutes of whatever in the middle.
There's not a lot to the script.
No.
But everything else, it's like, it's done so beautifully and so well, and there are so many interesting elements to it that it makes it really enjoyable.
There's a lot of detail in it that's interesting, like we didn't talk about it, but there's a point when Jocelyn's like handmaiden asks Roland, like, hey, what is Sir Ulrich's tunic gonna be? So my lady can match, and he's like green with a little bit of
pale
wood
green.
toggles, and he's like looking at the tent. Like they had to cut their tent to make a tunic for it. Like he handmade it right there. I guess that's his skill. Roland's skill is apparently he's pretty good at sewing. But yeah, there's little details like that. You're like, that's brilliant. But the movie's not good.
No.
So I feel like I would watch this again if we ever had cable and this happened. I'm flipping through the channels and it was on. I feel like this is something you can stop and watch if it's on TV and you just happen to see it. You might sit there and watch it, but I don't know if
old favorites.
I don't know if I'd ever go back and just like, I feel like watching A Knight's Tale and watch it again.
Probably not.
So I can't say if this ruined my childhood or not. Like it wasn't as good as I remember, but it's not terrible. Like I don't feel like I wasted my time watching
my
it.
impression of the movie is irreversibly altered, but I still enjoy it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, that's like in the last 5 movies, we've had 3 where we're just kind of like, it's weird. We're on a roll.
Maybe we're just really cynical right now.
Yeah.
As we should be.
Yeah. So what are we going to be covering on our next episode?
Another film you've been trying to get me to cover for a long time, Biodome.
Yeah, we haven't done Pauly Shore yet. He's a big 90s icon.
No.
There are quite a few Pauly Shore movies I want to do, but I'm cool with doing Biodome.
Really?
Yeah.
How are we going to do Biodome?
How are we going to do it?
I said we can do it.
Yeah, let's do it. It makes sense. We've been captive in our apartment for a while, and he's captive in a dome.
I should live in a dome.
Yeah, so yeah, we're going to cover the Pauly Shore classic Biodome. And yeah, it'll be fun. Can you tell our listeners where we can find you on the internets?
All over the internet at Katrina Ossity, or Katrina Sherwood if you're into seeing some very political stuff.
Nice. And you can check out everything that's podcast related at MDXpods.com, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at MDXpods. And if you want to support the show, you can help us out on patreon.com/MDXpods. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.